The moment I saw the certified letter from the Pinecrest Mountain HOA, I knew my peaceful life in the Colorado Rockies was about to get complicated. My name is Owen Carter, and I had spent the last 3 years building my dream cabin just outside of Estes Park, Colorado. The property sat on 5 acres of pristine mountain land, complete with towering pines, a natural spring that fed into a creek running through my property, and views of Rocky Mountain National Park that could make grown men weep. I had poured my life savings into this place after selling my tech startup in Denver, and I wanted nothing more than to live out my days in peace, away from the noise and chaos of city life. The letter was dated January 15th, and as I tore it open standing in my driveway, snow crunching under my boots, I felt my blood pressure rising with each word I read. According to one Brenda Morrison, president of the Pinecrest Mountain HOA, I was being fined $500 for having excessive icicles hanging from my cabin's roof. Apparently, this violated Section 12.7 of the community bylaws, which stated that all properties must maintain a neat and orderly appearance free from potential hazards. I read the letter 3 times, certain I was missing something. When I had purchased this land, the previous owner never mentioned anything about an HOA. I had specifically looked for property outside of any homeowner association jurisdiction, because I valued my freedom and did not want anyone telling me what I could or could not do on my own land. I pulled out my property documents that evening, spreading them across my dining room table. I went through every single page, every clause, every addendum. There was absolutely no mention of any HOA, no covenants, no restrictions, nothing. My property was free and clear. The next morning, I drove down to the county clerk's office in Boulder County. The woman behind the counter, a friendly lady named Susan, helped me pull up all the records associated with my property. We spent 2 hours going through everything, and the conclusion was clear as mountain air. My property had never been part of any homeowner association. Armed with this information, I decided to pay Brenda Morrison a visit. According to the return address on the letter, she lived in the Pinecrest Mountain development, a cluster of upscale homes about a mile down the mountain from my cabin. The development had been built 5 years ago, right after I had purchased my land, but before I had started construction on my cabin. I pulled up to a large Tudor-style house with perfectly manicured landscaping, impressive considering we were in the middle of winter. A silver Lexus sat in the driveway with a custom license plate that read, "HOA Boss." I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The woman who answered looked exactly like I had imagined. Brenda Morrison appeared to be in her early 50s, with an aggressive blonde bob haircut, too much makeup, and the kind of pursed lips that suggested she had spent years perfecting her look of disapproval. She wore a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill and held a glass of white wine despite it being 11 in the morning. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone making it clear she had no interest in actually helping anyone. "I'm Owen Carter. I received this letter from you yesterday." I held up the certified mail. "About icicles on my cabin," her face lit up with recognition, though not the pleasant kind. "Oh yes, Mr. Carter, we have been trying to reach you for months about various violations. Since you never responded to our previous notices, we had to escalate to fines. I never received any previous notices, and that's not why I'm here. Mrs. Morrison, my property is not part of your HOA. I have the county records to prove it." She took a long sip of her wine, looking at me like I was a child who did not understand basic mathematics. "Mr. Carter, any property within the Pinecrest Mountain area falls under our jurisdiction. We have to maintain standards for the entire community. Your development is the community. My property predates your HOA by 2 years. I have the deed, the survey, everything. There's no legal basis for your fines. Brenda's expression hardened. I suggest you check your facts, Mr. Carter. Our bylaws clearly state that we govern all properties within a 2-mile radius of the development center. That includes your cabin. That's not how property law works. You cannot just decide to govern someone's property without their consent or a legal agreement. She stepped closer and I could smell the wine on her breath. We will see about that. The fine stands, and if you do not pay within 30 days, it will increase to $1,000. Good day, Mr. Carter. She closed the door in my face. I stood there for a moment, shocked by the audacity. I had dealt with difficult people during my years in the tech industry, but this was something else entirely. Over the next week, I received 3 more letters from the HOA. One claimed my firewood stack was too visible from the road and needed to be screened. Another stated that my truck, a perfectly functional Ford F-150, was not an approved vehicle color and needed to be painted or garaged at all times. The third letter informed me that my property lacked sufficient landscaping and that I needed to install at least 20 ornamental shrubs by April 1st. The total fines now amounted to $2,500. I spent that week consulting with a property attorney in Denver, a sharp woman named Patricia Reeves who specialized in HOA disputes. She reviewed all my documents and confirmed what I already knew. The Pinecrest Mountain HOA had absolutely no legal authority over my property. This is actually more common than you might think, Patricia told me during our meeting at her downtown office. HOAs sometimes try to extend their reach beyond their legal boundaries, especially if they think they can bully someone into compliance. The problem is, fighting them can be expensive and time-consuming. What are my options? You can ignore them, but they might escalate to legal action, which would be frivolous but would still cost you money to defend. You can send them a cease and desist letter, which I am happy to draft. Or you can file a complaint with the county about their harassment. I chose all 3 options. Patricia drafted a strongly worded cease and desist letter. I filed a formal complaint with Boulder County, and I decided I would ignore any further communications from the HOA unless they actually tried to take legal action. For about 2 weeks, things were quiet. I enjoyed the peace of winter in the mountains, spending my days working on my cabin's interior and my evenings reading by the fireplace. Then, on a Friday afternoon in early February, I came home from a supply run to find a construction crew on my property. 3 men in hard hats were standing near my water line, which ran from the natural spring on my property down toward the valley. The spring was the source of my water, and it also happened to feed into the creek that eventually flowed through the Pinecrest Mountain development. "What's going on here?" I called out, jogging over to them. The foreman, a burly guy with a gray beard, looked up from his clipboard. "HOA maintenance. We have been authorized to perform repairs on the community water system. This is not community water. This is my private spring on my private property." He looked confused and pulled out a work order. "Says here we are supposed to install a flow regulator and meter on the spring to ensure fair water distribution to all community members." My hands clenched into fists. Who authorized this? Brenda Morrison, HOA president. "Look, buddy, I do not want any trouble. I am just doing the job I was hired for. This is private property and you do not have permission to be here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The foreman sighed and looked at his crew. "You heard the man. Pack it up." As they loaded their equipment back into their truck, the foreman handed me a copy of the work order. I took it and immediately called Patricia Reeves. She was furious when I explained what had happened. They cannot do that. That is trespassing, possibly even attempted theft of services. I will file an injunction immediately. That evening, I did some investigating of my own. I followed the creek that originated from my spring down through the valley. Sure enough, it flowed directly through the Pinecrest Mountain development, where it had been channeled into an attractive stone waterway that wound through the community. I also noticed several pipes that appeared to be drawing water from the creek. The next morning, I hiked my property with a surveyor I had hired, a methodical man named Tom Chen, who had been surveying property in Boulder County for 20 years. We spent 3 hours walking every inch of my land and the area surrounding the spring. "This is interesting," Tom said, kneeling by the spring. "This is a natural spring, completely on your property. The water that flows from it is yours under Colorado water rights law as long as you have the proper permits." "Do I have the proper permits?" He checked his tablet, pulling up county records. "Yes, the previous owner filed for and received water rights in 1997. Those rights transferred to you with the property. You have first rights to this water, and you are allowed to use it as you see fit within reason." "What if I wanted to divert it, or reduce the flow downstream?" Tom raised his eyebrows. "As long as you are not violating any environmental regulations and you are staying within your permitted usage, you have that right. Though I would recommend consulting with a water rights attorney if you are thinking about making any major changes." I thanked Tom and paid him for his time. An idea was forming in my mind, but I needed to do more research first. I spent the weekend learning everything I could about Colorado water rights law. The more I read, the more I realized I had options that the HOA had never considered. On Monday morning, I received a call from Patricia. "Owen, I have good news and bad news." The good news is we filed the injunction, and a judge approved it. The HOA is legally prohibited from entering your property or interfering with your water rights. The bad news is that they filed a lawsuit against you. For what? They are claiming that your property is subject to their bylaws under something called the Mountain Communities Act, which supposedly allows HOAs to govern properties within their geographical influence zone. They are also claiming that you are interfering with community water access. Is the Mountain Communities Act even real? No. I have never heard of it, and I cannot find any reference to it in Colorado law. It appears to be something they made up. The judge is going to throw this out, but it will take time and it will cost you money in legal fees. I felt anger rising in my chest. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer is $5,000. The whole process, if it goes to trial, could be $20,000 or more. After I hung up with Patricia, I sat in my cabin and looked out at the mountains. I had come here for peace, and instead, I was being dragged into a legal battle over something completely frivolous. The HOA was counting on me either giving in or going broke trying to fight them. That afternoon, I made several phone calls. First, I called a water rights attorney named Michael Torres, who had been recommended by Tom Chen. I explained my situation and asked about my options regarding the spring. "You have significant rights here," Michael explained. "Under Colorado law, you own the water rights to that spring. You can use it, divert it, or even stop it from flowing downstream, as long as you are not violating any prior water rights agreements or environmental regulations." "Are there any prior agreements? Let me check." I heard typing on his end. "No. According to the records, your water rights are senior to any claims in the area. The Pinecrest Mountain development was built in 2020, and they never filed for separate water rights. They appear to have been using the creek water without proper authorization." This was getting more interesting by the minute. So if I wanted to divert the spring or reduce its flow, I could legally do that. Yes, but I would recommend giving proper notice and making sure you are not creating any safety hazards. Why do you ask? I explained the full situation with the HOA, the attempted work on my property, and the lawsuit they had filed. Michael listened carefully and then said something that made me smile. Owen, they have been using your water without permission for 5 years. You could potentially sue them for the value of that water. You could also simply exercise your water rights and cut off their supply. It is completely legal. We talked for another 30 minutes about the specifics. Michael agreed to draft a formal notice to the HOA and the county informing them that I would be exercising my water rights, and that the spring water would no longer flow down to the development. He also started drafting a counter-suit for the value of the water they had been using without authorization. The notice went out on February 10th. I also hired a local contractor to help me set up a proper water diversion system. We installed a cistern to store the spring water for my use, and created a diversion that would redirect overflow onto a different part of my property, away from the creek that fed the development. The work took 3 days. During that time, I received 8 phone calls from Brenda Morrison, all of which I sent to voicemail. I also received angry emails from other HOA board members, threatening everything from legal action to property liens. I forwarded everything to Patricia and Michael. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, we completed the water diversion. The spring that had fed the creek for thousands of years was now redirected. Within hours, the creek that ran through Pinecrest Mountain development began to dry up. The phone calls started coming in fast. First from Brenda, then from other residents, then from the HOA's attorney. I did not answer any of them. Instead, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee and watched the sunset over the mountains. The next morning, I had a visit from the sheriff's department. Deputy Martinez was a reasonable guy who I had met a few times in town. He looked uncomfortable as he approached my door. Owen, I have to ask you about the water situation. The HOA filed a complaint saying you have illegally cut off their water supply. I invited him in and showed him all my documentation. The water rights, the permits, the survey showing the spring was entirely on my property, and the legal notice we had filed. I also showed him the work order from the HOA trying to install equipment on my property without permission and copies of all their harassing letters. Deputy Martinez read through everything carefully. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. You have the legal right to control water on your property. I will note in my report that you have acted within your rights. I would expect the HOA to contact you soon to try to work something out. I look forward to it, I said. He left, and I went back to my coffee. Around noon, a black Mercedes pulled up to my cabin. A man in an expensive suit got out, followed by Brenda Morrison. The man introduced himself as Gerald Thornton, the HOA's attorney. Mr. Carter, we need to discuss this water situation. You have cut off water to an entire community. There are 43 homes in Pinecrest Mountain, and they all rely on that creek. That's interesting, Mr. Thornton, because according to county records, none of those homes ever filed for water rights. You have been using my water without permission for 5 years. Brenda cut in, her voice shrill. That water is a natural resource. You cannot just keep it for yourself. Actually, Mrs. Morrison, under Colorado law, I can. The spring is on my property and I hold the senior water rights. You never secured your own water source before building your development, which was a massive oversight on your part. Gerald tried to maintain his composure. Mr. Carter, we are willing to drop the lawsuit if you restore the water flow. That's not good enough. You have harassed me, fined me for violations that do not apply to my property, trespassed on my land, and filed a frivolous lawsuit against me. Dropping the lawsuit is not compensation for any of that. What do you want? Brenda demanded. First, a written acknowledgement from the HOA that my property is not and has never been under your jurisdiction. Second, a public apology to be sent to all HOA members explaining the situation. Third, compensation for 5 years of unauthorized water use. My attorney has calculated that at approximately $50,000. Fourth, reimbursement of all my legal fees. And fifth, you will never contact me again about any supposed violations or HOA business. Brenda's face turned red. That is absolutely ridiculous. We will never agree to that. I shrugged. Then I guess you will need to find another water source. I hear drilling a well in this area costs about $100,000, and there is no guarantee you will hit water. You might need to run a water line from town, which would cost significantly more. Gerald pulled Brenda aside and they had a heated conversation in whispers. Finally, Gerald turned back to me. We need time to discuss this with the HOA board. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, my water stays on my property. They left, and I called Patricia to update her. She was thrilled. Owen, this is perfect. You have all the leverage. They cannot survive without that water, especially not in the middle of winter when drilling would be nearly impossible. Over the next week, things escalated in ways I had not anticipated. The local news picked up the story after someone from the development called reporters, trying to paint me as a villain who was denying water to families. The first reporter who showed up was a young woman named Jessica Park from a Denver news station. I agreed to an interview and showed her all my documentation. I explained how the HOA had tried to exert control over my property illegally, how they had attempted to install equipment without permission, and how they had never secured their own water rights. So you are saying the HOA built an entire development without ensuring they had a legal water source? Jessica asked, her eyes wide. That's exactly what I'm saying. They assumed they could use water from the creek that originates on my property without asking permission or securing rights. Now they are facing the consequences of that assumption. The story aired that evening, and public opinion began to shift. Social media lit up with people sharing stories of their own HOA nightmares. Several legal experts were interviewed and confirmed that I was within my rights. The story went viral, and suddenly, I was getting calls from news outlets across the country. Meanwhile, the situation in Pinecrest Mountain was getting desperate. Without the creek water, which they had been using to supplement their municipal supply and maintain their landscaping features, the development was struggling. The decorative waterways were dry. Several homes had been using creek water for their gardens, and the whole place looked significantly less appealing. Property values in the development started to drop. Residents who had paid premium prices for their homes with beautiful water features were now looking at dry creek beds and dead plants. A group of residents formed a committee to sue the HOA board for mismanagement. On February 22nd, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. When I answered, a man's voice said, "Mr. Carter, my name is David Paulson. I am a resident of Pinecrest Mountain and I am calling to apologize." Apologize for what? I am one of the 43 homeowners here, and I had no idea what the HOA was doing in your situation. Most of us did not. Brenda Morrison has been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, and many of us have been unhappy with her for years. When your story hit the news, several of us started digging into HOA records, and we discovered a lot of concerning things. Like what? Like the fact that Brenda and the board never properly researched water rights before building here. Like the fact that they have been spending HOA funds on personal expenses. Like the fact that they falsified documents claiming your property was part of the HOA to try to collect fines from you. We have called an emergency meeting to remove the entire board and elect new leadership. I wanted to reach out to you personally to see if we could find a reasonable solution to this water situation. This was a development I had not expected. I appreciate the call, David. What did you have in mind? We would like to offer you a formal contract to purchase water rights from your spring. We would pay fair market value, cover all your legal expenses from this mess, and the new HOA board would send out a formal apology to all residents explaining what happened. We would also like to help you pursue legal action against Brenda Morrison and the old board for their fraudulent behavior. That's a much more reasonable approach than what I have been dealing with. We are reasonable people, Mr. Carter. Unfortunately, we elected an unreasonable person to represent us, and we are now facing the consequences. Can we meet to discuss terms? I agreed, and 2 days later, I sat down with David Paulson and 4 other residents at a coffee shop in Estes Park. They were genuinely apologetic and clearly embarrassed by the situation. David, a retired engineer in his 60s, led the conversation. We have done our homework, Mr. Carter. A water rights contract in this area typically runs about $15,000 annually for the amount of water we would need. We would like to offer you a 10-year contract at $20,000 per year, paid annually in advance. We will also cover all your legal fees, which we estimate at around $30,000 so far, and we will pursue legal action against the former board members for their mismanagement and fraudulent activities. I considered the offer. It was more than fair, and these people were not responsible for Brenda Morrison's behavior. I want one more thing. I want a conservation easement established that protects the spring and surrounding land from any future development. I want it in writing that no one can ever try to build on or near that spring. They agreed immediately. We shook hands, and David promised to have the contracts drawn up within a week. As we were leaving, a woman in the group, probably in her 50s, approached me. Mr. Carter, I wanted to tell you something. Brenda Morrison has been making our lives miserable for years. She fined my husband $500 because our dog barked too much. She fined another neighbor for having the wrong shade of beige paint on their shutters. She tried to ban children from playing in the streets because it was too noisy. You standing up to her has given the rest of us courage to do the same. Thank you. The emergency HOA meeting happened on March 1st. David invited me to attend as a guest, and I accepted out of curiosity. The meeting was held in the community center, and every single resident was there. The energy in the room was intense. Brenda Morrison stood at the front, trying to maintain control as residents shouted questions at her. Gerald Thornton, the attorney, sat beside her looking miserable. The meeting quickly devolved into chaos as residents demanded answers about the water situation, the financial mismanagement, and the fraudulent claims about my property. You told us the water was secured, one man yelled. You said we had rights to that creek. You have been fining people for ridiculous violations while spending HOA money on personal expenses, a woman added. We have the receipts. You charged the HOA for your personal landscaping, your car payments, even your wine club membership. Brenda tried to defend herself, but it was hopeless. Within an hour, a vote was called to remove the entire board. It passed unanimously, with only Brenda and the 3 other board members voting against it. A new interim board was elected on the spot, with David Paulson as the new president. After the meeting, Brenda stormed out, but not before shooting me a look of pure hatred. "This is all your fault," she hissed as she passed. "No, this is all your fault," I replied calmly. "You created this situation by trying to control something that was not yours to control." The new board moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, they had the water rights contract prepared and presented it to me. My attorney, Michael Torres, reviewed it and confirmed it was fair and legally sound. I signed it, and the new board paid the first year's fee plus all my legal expenses up front. On March 15th, I restored the water flow to the creek. It felt good to see it running again, knowing that this time it was flowing under a proper legal agreement that protected everyone's rights, but the story was not over yet. In early April, I received a call from Deputy Martinez. "Owen, I thought you should know. We arrested Brenda Morrison this morning." "For what?" "Fraud, embezzlement, and forgery." After the new HOA board went through the financial records, they discovered she had stolen over $200,000 from the HOA over the past 3 years. She also forged documents claiming your property was part of the HOA jurisdiction and attempted to file a fraudulent lien against your property. The district attorney is taking this very seriously. I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me was satisfied that justice was being served, but another part just felt sad that someone had let their need for control destroy their life. The case against Brenda Morrison moved through the court system over the next several months. The evidence was overwhelming. She had used HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, had falsified documents, and had even attempted to bribe a county clerk to alter records to show my property as part of the HOA jurisdiction. In July, she pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her attorney, Gerald Thornton, was censured by the State Bar Association for his role in filing the fraudulent lawsuit against me, though he avoided criminal charges by cooperating with prosecutors. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm after that. The new HOA board proved to be reasonable and respectful. They maintained the development well without the oppressive micromanagement that had characterized Brenda's reign. The water flowed through the creek. The homes looked beautiful, and everyone was happier. I became friendly with several of the residents, including David Paulson and his wife Margaret. They would occasionally hike up to my cabin for dinner, and we would sit on my porch watching the sunset over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. One evening in late August, David and I were sitting outside while Margaret helped me prepare dinner inside. "You know, Owen, what you did took a lot of courage. Most people would have just paid the fines and tried to keep the peace. I spent too many years letting other people push me around in the business world," I said. "When I came here, I decided I was done with that. This is my land, my home, and I was not going to let anyone take that away from me. You did more than protect your home. You freed an entire community from a tyrant. Property values have actually gone up since Brenda left. People feel like they can actually enjoy their homes now without fear of arbitrary fines and harassment." Margaret called us in for dinner, and we spent the evening enjoying good food and good company. As they were leaving, Margaret hugged me and said, "You are welcome at Pinecrest Mountain anytime, Owen. You are part of this community now, even if you are not technically in the HOA." After they left, I stood on my porch and looked down at the development. Lights twinkled in the windows of the homes, and I could see the creek reflecting moonlight as it wound through the valley. It looked peaceful and beautiful. The next few months brought more positive changes. The new HOA board implemented reasonable rules that actually enhanced property values without being oppressive. They established a community garden, organized neighborhood events, and created a fund to help residents with emergency home repairs. It was everything an HOA should be. In October, I received a letter from the Boulder County District Attorney's Office. They had completed their investigation into the entire situation and wanted to thank me for my cooperation. They also informed me that my testimony and evidence had been crucial in the case against Brenda Morrison. The letter noted that my actions had likely prevented further victims of HOA fraud and had set an important precedent for property rights in the county. I framed that letter and hung it in my cabin, not out of pride, but as a reminder that standing up for what is right matters, even when it is difficult. Winter came again, and with it, the icicles that had started this whole mess. They hung from my roof, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure, sparkling in the sunlight. I looked at them and smiled. No one was going to find me for them this year. One snowy afternoon in December, I was splitting firewood when a car pulled up. I was surprised to see Gerald Thornton, the former HOA attorney, getting out. He looked different, thinner and tired, like the past year had aged him considerably. "Mr. Carter, I hope you do not mind me stopping by. I wanted to apologize in person for my role in what happened." I set down my axe and wiped my hands on my jeans. "You drove all the way up here for that." I did. I have been doing a lot of thinking since the censure. I was so focused on winning the case and keeping my client happy that I did not stop to question whether what we were doing was right. I reviewed documents I should have questioned. I filed motions I should have refused to file. I let my ambition override my ethics. That takes a lot of courage to admit. I am trying to be a better attorney now. I am working with a nonprofit that helps homeowners fight fraudulent HOA claims. I wanted you to know that your case changed my perspective on this work. You helped me remember why I went to law school in the first place, which was to help people, not to bully them. We talked for a while longer, and I offered him some coffee before he drove back down the mountain. As he left, he turned and said, "Thank you for not destroying me when you could have. I know you had grounds to file a complaint that would have gotten me disbarred." "I think people deserve second chances when they genuinely try to change," I replied. Christmas came, and the new HOA board invited me to their holiday party. I almost declined, not being much for social gatherings, but David convinced me to come. I am glad I did. The community center was decorated beautifully, and the residents welcomed me like an old friend. Children played, adults chatted over wine and appetizers, and everyone seemed genuinely happy. A woman I had not met before approached me with a plate of cookies. "Mr. Carter, I am Jennifer Walsh. I wanted to thank you. My husband and I were actually considering moving because of Brenda's harassment. We have a special needs son, and she tried to fine us because his therapy equipment was visible in our yard. She said it was an eyesore. After you stood up to her, we felt like we could fight back too. We stayed, and now we love it here." Stories like that made everything worthwhile. I realized that this fight had never really been just about me or my property. It had been about standing up against abuse of power, about protecting the rights of everyone, not just myself. As winter turned to spring, I watched the snow melt and the creek flow strong with runoff. The water agreement was working perfectly. The development had the water they needed. I was compensated fairly, and the spring was protected for future generations. In March, I received an invitation to speak at a property rights conference in Denver. Apparently, my case had become something of a landmark in the battle against HOA overreach. I initially declined, not being comfortable with public speaking, but Patricia Reeves convinced me to reconsider. "Owen, there are thousands of people dealing with situations like yours. Your story could help them understand their rights and give them courage to stand up for themselves." I agreed, and in April, I found myself standing in front of 200 people at a conference center in Denver. I was nervous at first, but as I told my story, I saw people nodding and taking notes. During the question and answer session, person after person stood up to share their own HOA nightmares. One man had been fined for painting his front door the wrong shade of red. A woman had been threatened with a lien because her garden gnomes were considered too whimsical. An elderly couple had been harassed for installing a wheelchair ramp without HOA approval, despite it being required by law. I spent 3 hours after my talk speaking with attendees, offering advice and connecting them with resources. It was exhausting but fulfilling. I realized that by fighting my own battle, I had inadvertently become part of a larger movement to reform HOA laws and protect homeowner rights. Summer arrived and my cabin was finally complete. Every detail was exactly as I had envisioned, from the stone fireplace to the wrap-around porch to the garden I had planted near the spring. I spent my days hiking, reading, and working on small projects around the property. David and Margaret became regular visitors, and through them, I met others from the development who would occasionally hike up for visits. The relationship between me and Pinecrest Mountain had transformed from hostile to harmonious. We had mutual respect and clear boundaries, which is really all anyone can ask for. In August, I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell my story as part of a larger piece about HOA reform. I agreed, on the condition that they also interview the residents of Pinecrest Mountain to show how communities can recover from bad leadership. The filming took place over several weeks, and the documentary premiered at a film festival in Boulder that October. It was well received and later picked up by a streaming service. I was surprised by how many people reached out after watching it, thanking me for highlighting an issue that affected millions of Americans. One of the most satisfying moments came in November when I received a call from a woman in Arizona. She had watched the documentary and used the information to fight her own HOA, which had been trying to fine her for having solar panels on her roof. She won her case, and the HOA was forced to change its bylaws to allow renewable energy installations. "You gave me the courage to fight back," she told me. "I thought I was alone, but your story showed me I had rights and that standing up to bullies is worth it." That winter, almost 2 years after receiving that first letter from Brenda Morrison, I sat on my porch watching snow fall over the mountains. Icicles were forming on my roof again, long and beautiful in the fading light. I smiled, thinking about how something as simple as icicles had led to such a dramatic chain of events. My phone rang. It was David. "Owen, I wanted to give you an update. The HOA just completed a full financial audit and we are in excellent shape. The water agreement we have with you is working perfectly, and we have even been able to lower HOA fees because we are not wasting money on frivolous lawsuits and Brenda's personal expenses." "That is great news, David. There is something else. The residents took a vote, and we would like to name the creek that runs through the development Carter Creek after you. We want to install a plaque explaining the history and importance of water rights. We think it will be educational for residents and visitors." I was touched. I would be honored. The plaque was installed in December, and they had a small ceremony to unveil it. It read, "Carter Creek, named in honor of Owen Carter, whose defense of water rights and property law protected this community and set an important precedent for homeowner rights across Colorado. This creek originates from a natural spring on Mr. Carter's property and flows through our community under a legal agreement that respects the rights of all parties. May it serve as a reminder that cooperation and respect for law create stronger communities than control and intimidation." Standing there with David, Margaret, and dozens of residents, I felt a sense of completion. What had started as a nightmare had transformed into something positive. A tyrant had been removed, justice had been served, laws had been clarified, and a community had learned valuable lessons about governance and respect. That evening, I returned to my cabin and built a fire. I thought about the journey of the past 2 years. The anger I had felt when I received that first letter, the frustration of dealing with Brenda's harassment, the satisfaction of standing my ground, and the ultimate resolution that had benefited everyone involved. I realized that the real victory was not in defeating the HOA or exposing Brenda Morrison's crimes, though those things mattered. The real victory was in proving that individual rights still mean something, that abuse of power can be challenged successfully, and that communities can heal and grow when people work together with mutual respect. As I sat there watching the fire, I heard a sound outside. I looked out the window and saw a small herd of elk moving through the snow near my property line. They moved with quiet grace, undisturbed by human drama and politics, just living their lives in these beautiful mountains. That is what I had come here for, I remembered. Peace, quiet, connection with nature. And finally, after all the chaos, I had it. The years that followed were peaceful. The water agreement continued without issue, the new HOA board proved to be responsible stewards, and my cabin became the sanctuary I had always dreamed it would be. I occasionally gave talks or interviews about property rights and HOA reform, but mostly I just lived my life, enjoying the mountains and the community I had accidentally helped to heal. Brenda Morrison was released from prison after serving 2 years of her 3-year sentence. I heard she moved to another state and was working as a retail manager. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, though I had my doubts. Some people never change. Gerald Thornton rebuilt his legal practice, focusing on defending homeowners against HOA abuse. He became quite successful and was often quoted in news articles about HOA reform. He sent me a Christmas card every year, a small gesture that I appreciated. Patricia Reeves and Michael Torres continued to be my attorneys, and they both saw significant increases in their HOA-related cases after my story went public. They told me that many of their new clients specifically sought them out because of their work on my case. As for me, I finally had what I wanted. My cabin in the mountains, my privacy, my rights protected by law and respected by my neighbors. The icicles still formed on my roof every winter, and every time I looked at them, I remembered the battle they had inadvertently started. But mostly, I just saw them as beautiful creations of nature, ice and light combining in temporary perfection, before melting away with the spring thaw. They were a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, but that peace is always the ultimate goal. I never regretted standing my ground against the HOA. I never regretted the fight, the legal fees, or the months of stress. Because in the end, I protected not just my own rights, but the rights of everyone who came after me. I helped expose corruption, strengthen property law, and prove that individuals still have power against institutions when they are willing to stand up for what is right. The mountains were quiet as I sat on my porch that final evening of the year, watching the sun set over Rocky Mountain National Park. The creek flowed below, carrying water from my spring through the valley, just as it had for thousands of years and would for thousands more. But now it flowed under the protection of law, respected by all parties, a symbol of what communities can achieve when they choose cooperation over control. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to the journey, to the lessons learned, and to the peace that finally settled over these mountains like snow. The battle with the HOA seemed like ancient history now, a story I told occasionally but rarely thought about. Life had moved on, as it always does, and I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I wanted to do, with no one to answer to but myself. The icicles sparkled in the last rays of sunlight, and I smiled. Sometimes the smallest things lead to the biggest changes. And sometimes, standing up for yourself creates ripples that spread far beyond anything you could have imagined. I was just one man who refused to be bullied, but that refusal changed dozens of lives and influenced laws that would protect thousands more. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the clear mountain sky, I went inside and closed the door on another perfect day in my imperfect, beautiful, hard-won paradise.